All right, so today we're going to look at liquidity forecast, how to run it in SAP ByDesign. For that, we're going to be working primarily inside the liquidity management work center. In addition to that, maybe I'll create a couple transactions so you can kind of see how that impacts your liquidity forecast. And we'll also go into the business configuration, which you may or may not have access to, so you may need to get with your system administrator if you are interested in any of those changes. So let's talk about the liquidity forecast. What is it? It's a report that is a little bit more complicated than a report because it involves a job that's going to go out and essentially amalgamate open payables, open receivables, any impending forecasted cash impacting transactions, and then display them on an aged basis for you so that you can kind of understand what your cash position is going to be in the future. So for that, what it does pull in is payables, receivables, any outstanding cash transaction. One thing that it does not show is purchase orders. So that's maybe an unfortunate limitation, but just be aware of that. So those do not appear in your forecast. So how do we get the forecast? Well, first we have to have a forecast run. And once we've run the job, then we can have a look at what the actual forecasted transaction results are. And so in fact, in this system here, I can see there is already a liquidity forecast daily that's been set up. If I go into here and have a look at this particular job, it was actually set up in 2013. And you can see that it is, let me go on the view jobs, it's set up for a recurrence to run every single day. So this is actually not a bad way, not a bad idea. So if you do want to use this job, you can run it on demand. I will do both examples. So I'm going to go in and look at the one that's been created sort of based on this timed event. And then we'll also create one from scratch so you can see that as well. So if you do want to time one, you can do it something like this. You can set it to run, you probably want to run it right at the end of the day or first thing in the morning. You're going to want to run it after all of your transactions are posted, your check runs, ideally after your bank file has been imported, your bank reconciliation, because then it'll give you more accurate information in there as well. So you can see then that this one runs on every single day. So 2298 is the job that ran this morning, and it finished and it was successful. So keep that number in mind, 2298. We're going to go in and have a look at the result of this job. So if I go in here to my liquidity forecast, I was playing around earlier, so I closed out some of these other forecasted. So maybe let's just look at liquidity forecasts that are in modification. So 2298, this is the one that the system ran this morning. Let's have a look at how that job looks. So I'm going to go down to the cogwheel here at the bottom of my screen, and I'm going to choose to analyze data. Now, when this job opens, it probably defaults to whatever company you're a user for. I'm going to switch this to a company that has a significant number of transactions. And this is what it gives us. So you have a couple of different ways to view this. You can also make your own modifications to the views and selections based on standard reporting features, because now you're essentially in a standard SAP ByDesign report. But these views here are very useful out of the box because you can switch this easily between daily, monthly, and weekly. So for example, if I switch this to the monthly view, then what I'm seeing up here at the top is for each period. So right now we're looking at as of today, so liquidity forecast for today's date, and then we'd be looking at May, June, July, August. If we were to switch this to weekly, we're in week 17 of 2020, but you can forecast out to week 18, week 19, etc. So let's talk a little bit about what this report is showing us. And just Kayla probably already mentioned this when we start, but as you have questions, feel free to just type them into the chat panel. We'll answer the questions at the end, but as you think of them, feel free to type them in there. And even if I go ahead and cover it anyway, we're happy to take your questions so you don't forget them. So what are we seeing in this report? Things are broken up into categories based on your specific bank accounts. So in this specific company, Company 1000, there is only one bank account, Bank of Cleveland. And so it's showing us this liquidity balance of 15,548, which is my opening cash. These are my outstanding checks in the system that associate with that bank. And so this gives us to a closing cash balance. And then what's going on down here under the not assigned is these are transactions that are pending in the system, which the system doesn't necessarily know which bank is going to pay those. So that's why they just sort of show up here as the not assigned. So this is not a problem in any way. You will see this in your own liquidity forecast. Although if you're running this right now in your system, you are probably seeing a lot of more information across these columns. Because I'm in a test database that doesn't have a lot going on in it, or most of my transactions are very old, all of my cash transactions are sitting here in my current column. However, I do have something, a few things out into the future. So let's go and explore some of those. So before we do that, let's talk a little bit what's going on the top of the report. So at the top of the report, this is where you're really looking at the net effect of your liquidity across all of these events at the bottom. So these are just the summaries. So these numbers here, like your 15,408 takes you to your 14,183, and that becomes your opening balance for the next day. That's fine, but you have to look at the top to see it all factored in together. So now here on the rows that are underscored with yellow, this is what's really the meaningful information, because this is predicting that as of next week, we will have another $8.25 reduction in our cash, which will take us to this balance. And then if we forecast this out to the 21st week, we'll have another 862. If you want to understand what's making up these balances, you can click on those, and then you're going to get your drill down go to, and you can then launch the liquidity forecast transaction detail report. So that report is going to open as a separate tab. You still have your original report. So if you click on the bottom of your screen, you can go back to what you were just looking at. I'm going to go to this report that I launched. And so here I can see 862. So this does relate to a supplier invoice 1971. And so the expected value date on this is 05/20, which is why it's being forecasted out in the future, which is how your system should look. So if I want to actually look at this source document, then I can see this particular invoice has a posting date of 04/20, and so there the due date is 05/20. So the system is predicting this payable would be paid on 05/20, and that's when it's going to impact your cash. We could do the same thing for, even if we look at all of these ones that say overdue payments. So like I said, this test system, everything is kind of just sitting in here. But if we look at this transaction report, that's a summary of things. So here I have a whole bunch of customer invoices. It looks like 1.4 million, and then a bunch of credit memos. So this is a test system. If I were to drill down on one of these invoices, I'm probably going to see that this invoice is very old. So there we go. In fact, this goes back to September of 2018. So this invoice was never cleared out of the system. So what the cash forecast is predicting that all that money, this money is theoretically due right now, and these funds could come in today. So that's why it's forecasting into the current column. So your system should look differently. You should actually see your AR sort of spread out across your columns, however your receivables and payables are aged in the system. And we'll do a test on that just to kind of make sure so you can see a similar idea. And then one other thing I'll point out to you here, so if you've got something like this 825, you can also expand on these and you can see what these specifically relate to. So here you'll see whether it's related to payables, like that invoice, employees, and tax. So this is sort of interesting. There's $8.25 for for the week. Actually, let's turn this to monthly view. So it looks to me like that's sitting as 05/2020. Let's go finer. Let's go to the daily view. There we go. So May 1st, what is this all about? If we were to drill down on this particular item, we can see that there is a customer invoice in the system. Why does it have this $8 in the tax? Because this invoice is actually fairly current. So it was issued out April 1st. And we can see here that the system has $8.25 of tax payable. And so the assumption is that on May 1st, this state sales tax is going to be due to the tax authority. And so therefore, it's also kind of grabbing in that liability and showing it as what it's expecting to be an impact to the cash. So once again, if you look at this in your system, you're probably going to get much more meaningful data spread across all the days than I have here. But let's create an event to try and make it look like that. And then we'll rerun the forecast. So I'm going to close this out. I'm going to go into my customer invoicing. And I went in here and I got something sort of staged for us. So I set up an invoice for $18,000. Pardon me. If we go in and have a look at this invoice, we can see that it's due on 30 days from today, so 05/22. So I'm going to release this invoice. Hopefully that goes off without a hitch, and we'll have a financial posting from this. Tells me it was saved successfully. Maybe I'll just do a really quick confirmation. So great, there I can see my income and my accounts receivable of $18,000. Now, if I were to go to look at that liquidity forecast that we have just looked at, I am not going to see that $18,000 in it. The reason being is because this forecast was run at 9 a.m. today. And so that document did not exist. And this is where it becomes important that you are thinking about when you're running your liquidity forecast, because it's going in, it's grouping that information. The moment you add another transaction to the system, that particular liquidity forecast is really no longer valid. So how do we run one just sort of off cycle? We go into liquidity forecast runs, and I'm going to choose to do a new liquidity forecast run. And I'm going to give it a description. There's very few parameters to run this report, so it's very simple. So I can just call this off cycle daily forecast run, something like that. And then I want to make it active. This one other parameter field you have here, no restriction. We'll look at this afterwards. This is where you can go to business configuration and create some profiles that limit your companies. I don't think that's particularly useful, but we'll have a look at it anyway, so you can understand how it works. And so once it's active, I can now choose to schedule it. And then rather setting it up as a recurrence like my other job, which was running at 9 a.m. each morning, I'm just going to run this one start immediately. And we'll just run it that one time, or however many times I actually want to invoke it. So if I close this and I go back to my liquidity forecast run screen, I'm going to hit the refresh button here. And now I can see this new off-cycle run that I've created under my name. And this might take a few minutes to prepare. So if as you're waiting, you can hit the refresh button here on the bottom. And each time you invoke this one, so I don't have to run a new liquidity forecast, I can just come back and essentially run this again. I will get another job. Similar to if I go down to the one that's set to run at each 9 a.m., you can see here I can scroll down through history at all the times this job was run, in this particular case, the last 7 days. Oops, back to this one. So while we're waiting for that job to finish running, let's just go into the business configuration and I'll show you quickly what that forecast profile relates to. So this is where you may not have access in your system, but your system administrator would have access. You may be able to run this through the first implementation project if it's open. If not, you can get your open activities through the other configuration screen. So I'm going to search for the word liquidity. And so there's the setting around liquidity forecasts. As I mentioned earlier, there isn't a lot in here. What you can do is essentially create profile codes that just target a specific company. Currently, when you're running the liquidity forecast out of the box, it runs all companies. However, as you saw when you go to look at the report, you can filter on a specific company. So I don't know if this is really that useful, but it's there. Once you've created the company definition, you could then adapt the profile further. So working days to forecast may or may not be useful. And perhaps this is useful. Maybe you want to exclude tax or exclude blocked items, meaning AP invoices that you've set on a payment block. So that's what you can create in those profiles, and then you would have the ability to invoke them when you run that liquidity forecast like I did earlier. All right, so I'm going to go back to our job. Let's see if it's finished. So there we go. I can see that this is successfully created. If you are running this the first time, you may want to go in and just make sure there's no errors in this. So you can go to settings and results, and you can just see if there's any warnings or errors. Typically, this job should run without an error. If you do get errors, probably relates to exchange rate. So if you do have multiple legal entities with different currencies, and you don't have current exchange rate set up in the system, that's one reason you could potentially get a warning or an error. But otherwise, this job typically runs simply because there's not a lot of parameters to it. So once we've run it, we really don't need to be in this liquidity forecast run screen. That's only to launch the job. Now we can go look for that forecast. So the one we're looking for is 2303. And we can see there's one. It's sitting here in modification. I'll come back and talk about that status in a moment. And I'm going to go analyze this data. And I'm going to set this to my one company. And let's switch this to a monthly view. So now we are seeing some receivables and payables. So there's our $18,000 invoice that we posted. So this is positively impacting our cash forecast based on that invoice that's been put in the system. And it's now showing in the proper column because of the expected due date of that invoice. Once again, if we go look at this for week or day, we should be able to go over and find, there we go. So it's on the 21st week. That's when this particular invoice is due. So that's our predicted cash forecast. If we want to just sort of validate some of these numbers so you understand how this is working, I mean, you could go into the general ledger and we could run a trial balance. So 15,548, this is just a year-to-date trial balance. So this should be my balance as of now, 15,548,169. If we go back to our liquidity, that's where it's getting that 15,548,169. Outstanding payments, so those should be approximately the value that's sitting in your cash disbursement account, depending on how you've set up clearing events in your system. So it's really pulling at the top here, those numbers from your TB, and then here in the not assigned, and then aggregating it up at the top is really the breakdown of your payables and receivables based on the subledgers and how they're aging out. Okay, so that's actual transactions. Let's have a look at some other types of liquidity events you could create in the system. So if we go to our liquidity management, you do have the ability to create something called forecasted planning items. So to do this, you have a couple of options. You can do it directly through the ByDesign user interface using this new option forecast planning item. You could also do it through an Excel upload template, which would then upload the same way sort of a journal voucher does. So these forecasted planning items do not create any type of a journal entry in your system. All they create is a transaction in the liquidity forecast tables. So the Excel spreadsheet, this is pretty much the same fields you're going to see when we go into the user interface. So if you want to use the Excel, this could be useful if you do have significant number of forecasted events. I'm just going to keep it simple and do one through the interface. So you're going to choose essentially a payment method, which is going to just kind of indicate what the what the type of transaction, that's going to group it on the report for you. So it could be anything. So let's just put in, let's say 150,000. So we're going to call this an increase, and we'll make this on 05/15. So when does this event expire? We can say 06/15. Make sure you assign it to the right company. And then your transaction source. So once again, this is just sort of for information only on the report. So we'll say domestic banks. We can associate it with a bank account, and then it's going to put it in the report under the bank account rather than in the unidentified. And then you can put in whatever this forecasted planning item is. So maybe this is a, I don't know, funding from shareholders. So whatever it is that you predict is coming into the system. Once again, this is for reporting purposes only. It's not going to book a journal entry. It is going to expire. So at some point, it becomes meaningless, right? So I can save this. If I save it, it doesn't really do anything until I release it. Transaction currency, that would be useful. So we'll put in my US dollars. And we'll release this. And then I'm going to close that. So you can essentially create on this list as many forecasted events as you want, or you can use the Excel upload to upload those events, either way. Now I'm going to go back to my forecasted liquidity forecasts, and we're going to take this one here and we're going to indicate that we want to refresh planning items on this. And then I want to analyze the data. Just want to create a selection for this company and save myself some time, but so if we go out to May 15th, now we can see our inbound $150,000 cash that we're expecting to come in. And then of course it's indicates in the specific rows based on the way that you flag that transaction. Actually, let's look at this at monthly, it'd be easier to read. So other payments. And you can drill down on this transaction too if you want. So it does get you to the transaction detail screen, and you can get that this was essentially an external item. So that was the payment method that we chose on that forecasted event. And this is how it came in. Another thing that you can do that's similar to this is a direct debit in the system. One other thing I'll mention is, so you notice that I did not have to rerun this liquidity forecast run because I have the option here of refreshing from the planning items. So in that case, it is reaching in and it is looking for new planning items. And so you can essentially keep this particular forecasted run 2303 active, keep adding forecasted events until you get it to the point that you want without rerunning the job. But that does not, this refresh does not go in and search for new receivables invoices or payables invoices or things like that. So as we've done earlier, we entered that customer invoice for 18,000. That would not show up on the morning run. I have to actually go and rerun that. So keep that in mind. This refresh is only grabbing the planned items. Now, if I go into my liquidity management, I don't know how many of you are using bank payment advice. But this is another transaction. For all purposes, it works the same way as a forecasted planning event. So if you are using this screen, chances are you're using this as posting advice and you're clicking this checkbox here. When you click this checkbox, it creates a journal voucher. So this screen is used to essentially post something directly to cash that doesn't, it could offset a payable or receivable, or you could offset it directly to the GL account, but it's not going through an AP check or an ACH or wire payment. So this is a good way to post something where maybe you're getting a government tax refund, or you're getting or maybe if there's a rent payment or something like that, or utility payment that comes out of your account automatically, and therefore there's no check. So you may be familiar with the screen from that purpose. You can use the screen the same way not choose posting advice, and then you can enter information in here that is essentially future dated for forecast. So I could do the same sort of transaction in here. So this could be future bank expense, whatever we want to call this. Keep in mind this advice type, this is a little bit confusing because this credit or debit refers to how the bank perceives it. Therefore, if you say debit, it's actually not increasing cash, it's decreasing cash. And then you would put in a future date here. So for example, I could do a 501, can choose my payment. We'll just say this is a direct debit, and let's just make this 2,500. And then let's reference a bank account. And then I'm going to release this. And so that should have created an item dated for our 0501. Now I'm going to go back to here. I'm actually not sure off the top of my head if this is considered a planning item, but let's try it and see. If it doesn't, we can rerun the job again. So I've run that. I'm going to analyze the data. And I'm not seeing it here on the 0501. So unlike the planning items, this is where the direct debit is different. It's more like a transaction that's created by a payable or a receivable. So let's close out of here, go back to our liquidity management. We're going to go to our forecasted run. And rather than creating an entirely new run, I'm just going to take this one we already created, off cycle run, go into the schedule button, and I'm just going to invoke it again. And then we're just going to give this a few minutes to run. And maybe while I'm waiting, oh, this now says in process. Let's just see. Usually when it gets to in process, it finishes quickly. It does. Okay. So now I'm going to go to my forecasts. And now we have 2304. And let's analyze this data. And so now we can see a transaction here under 0501. So I think that's really all there is to it. Maybe I'm just going to pause there and see if there are any questions accumulating. Kayla, I don't know if I can see them or not. Do you have questions out there?
I don't see any right now, Alex. If you have any questions, either just raise your hand, or it's like a virtual raise your hand, or we have the questions window or the chat window.
Yeah, and if you don't have any questions on this, if you have any feedback or did this make sense, I'd be curious to know if this is something you are currently using. We're just wondering if you're using it properly or if you're even not using it at all. And this is your first time, if you didn't even know it existed. Okay, Kayla, I guess guess there's no questions.
Nope, not that I see here.
Okay, well then that's a wrap. If anybody does think of something after the fact, feel free to reach out to us and we'd be happy to help you. Feel free to try and run this in your environment. There's no risk in running this report because it doesn't post anything. So should be no issue to just try this out and see if it's working. And if you're not getting the expected results, please reach out to VistaVu and we'd be happy to help you.
Yeah, and if you're interested in the next week's session, it's tools for better performing collection activities in SAP Business by Design, then go to our resources page on our website, scroll all the way to the bottom, and you can register there, or you'll get an email about 2 days after this with the registration information. So if that's everything, then I'll close it out and have a great day, everyone.
Thanks, Kayla. Have a great day, everybody. Stay safe, and we'll see you next week.